My name is Margaret Hayes, and at 77, I thought I had experienced everything. Life had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of family. I spent decades supporting my children, helping them financially and emotionally. I thought that when I grew older, I'd at least be welcomed at family dinners with warmth. That evening, I was dressed in a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, nothing extravagant, just something respectable. I glanced at the clock. Dinner at my son's house was supposed to start at 7 p.m., and I was looking forward to a quiet evening with my family. Then, my phone buzzed. Expecting a friendly reminder or a quick question from my son, I picked up my glasses and opened the message. My heart stopped. The words on the screen read, "You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there." I sat down slowly, the phone trembling in my hands. 8 words. No call. No conversation. Just a text that cut deeper than any argument or disagreement could. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake. Perhaps my son's phone had been hacked. But no, it was his number, his words, his tone. Memories flashed in my mind, my son Ethan, clinging to my hand on his first day of school, crying when his first dog passed away, proudly introducing his wife, Claire, to me years ago. And now, that same grown man had told me I was unwelcome in my own family. The house was silent. Too silent. I walked to my old wooden desk, a piece that had belonged to my mother, and opened the drawer where I kept all my financial documents. Each folder meticulously organized, detailing years of giving, checks for Ethan's business startup, payments for Claire's real estate classes, contributions toward home renovations, and down payments. I realized then that my generosity had become invisible, expected, and even taken for granted. I looked at a brochure from the house I had helped them buy. My contributions, over $120,000, had never earned me a seat at the dinner table. My heart ached. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had long avoided: was this love, or merely a transaction? That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about the message, the countless hours I had spent giving, and the stark realization that my presence in their lives had become conditional. By sunrise, I knew one thing clearly: it was time to take back control of my life. The morning light spilled into my bedroom, but sleep never came. I sat quietly, holding a cup of tea, staring at the wall. The text from Ethan kept replaying in my mind. You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there. For decades, I had poured my heart, my energy, and my finances into their lives. I had helped build their home, paid for repairs, contributed to tuition, and supported their every whim. And now, I realized, they no longer saw me as a mother or grandmother, they saw me as a resource. I rose from the chair and walked to the old desk, where every folder told a story of sacrifice. My hands trembled as I picked up a thick folder labeled Ethan and Claire. Inside were stacks of receipts, payments toward their house, renovations, car repairs, tuition fees, and even small, thoughtful gifts I had sent over the years. Every check, every transaction, every note of encouragement, it had been invisible to them. Expected. Taken for granted. The realization hit me hard. All my life, I had been giving without expectation, yet my love had been treated like a transaction. And now, after being shut out, I knew it was time to make a change. I made myself a strong cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder. My mind was calm, but my resolve was fierce. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first. I picked up the phone and called Riley Thompson, the lawyer who had helped my late husband with his estate. Good morning, Riley, I said, my voice steady. I need to suspend all automatic payments from my accounts and revoke the power of attorney I granted my son, Ethan Hayes. There was a pause on the line. Every payment? Riley asked. Yes. Every single one, I replied firmly. Riley typed rapidly on the other end. This is a significant move, Margaret. I'll need your signature for the full process, but I can begin the suspension immediately. Do it today, I instructed. The act was simple, yet liberating. I realized the weight I had carried for years, the compromises, the silent generosity, the constant giving, was finally lifting. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of power, a reminder that my love didn't require permission to exist. That afternoon, Ethan arrived at the house. I was calm. I had made tea, and for the first time, I didn't wait for his permission. He didn't knock politely. He barged in, expecting control. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his worry barely masking irritation. "You uninvited me from your house, Ethan," I said quietly but firmly. "The house I helped pay for. I'm done being invisible." He sank into a chair, stunned. I poured 2 cups of tea, one for him, one for me, and for the first time, the balance of power had shifted. Ethan sat slumped in the living room chair, staring at me as if I had suddenly become a stranger. I didn't rush to explain myself or beg for forgiveness. I simply let the silence stretch between us, heavy with years of unspoken disappointment and overlooked sacrifices. You canceled everything?" Ethan finally asked, disbelief and anger lacing his voice. "Yes. All automatic payments, every single one. And I revoked the power of attorney," I replied calmly, meeting his eyes. He blinked, as if trying to process the enormity of my actions. "But, Mom. Claire, the house, the bills, the mortgage. They're your responsibilities, Ethan," I said firmly. "I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the safety net anymore." For the first time, I saw the shock register in his expression. His mouth opened, then closed. He had expected me to comply silently, as I always had. But the woman sitting across from him, the one who had quietly managed everything for decades, was no longer the same. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" he demanded. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady. "I understand that years of giving have been treated as obligations rather than acts of love. I understand that my presence was only valued when it served your convenience. And I understand that it's time to draw boundaries." He sank lower into the chair, unable to find words. That's when my granddaughter, Lila, entered the room quietly. She had always been perceptive, noticing more than anyone realized. "Grandma," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Are you really doing this?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly, smiling at her. "Sometimes standing up for yourself is the kindest thing you can do, even for the people you love." Ethan's frustration turned to guilt, but he didn't know how to respond. Claire walked into the doorway, her usual confident composure replaced by shock. "Margaret, this isn't fair," Claire said sharply. "You can't just cut us off." "I can," I replied. "And I will. Not out of anger, but out of love, for myself. Real love doesn't mean being taken for granted. It means respecting yourself enough to step away when others won't treat you with the dignity you deserve." I poured a fresh cup of tea and handed one to Lila. She smiled softly and took a sip. Ethan and Claire sat in stunned silence, realizing for the first time that the woman they had controlled through financial dependence had reclaimed her voice. That evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. The house was quiet, yet alive with possibility. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just a provider, I was someone who had boundaries, someone who demanded respect. And that, more than anything else, was worth every uncomfortable moment of confrontation. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. I sat at my old wooden desk, sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting off the stacks of papers I had collected over the years. Each folder, meticulously organized, told a story of decades of support, tuition payments, home repairs, gifts, even the down payment on the new townhouse Ethan and Claire had purchased. I opened the thickest folder, labeled Ethan and Claire, and slowly flipped through the pages. Each receipt, each bank transfer, each handwritten note revealed the truth I had been avoiding for years. I had built their world, and yet, I was left standing outside of it. The realization hit me harder than I expected. My generosity had become invisible. My love had been treated as a transaction. And now, after receiving that text, I knew I couldn't continue being the silent provider. Something inside me shifted. I picked up the phone and called Riley Thompson, my trusted lawyer. I need to ensure no further automatic payments leave my account. And revoke the power of attorney I gave my son. There was a brief pause. Margaret, are you certain? Riley asked. Yes, I said firmly. Every single payment. It ends today. As Riley began the process, I felt a strange mix of relief and power. For the first time, the weight I had carried for decades, supporting them financially, emotionally, and socially, was lifting. I was reclaiming my life, my voice, and my peace. Just as I finished, a knock echoed through the house. Ethan had arrived, his face a mixture of shock and frustration. He barged in without asking permission, expecting control, expecting me to continue as I always had. Mom, what's going on? He demanded. His eyes flicked nervously toward the folder I had left on the desk. You uninvited me from your life, I said calmly. The house I helped fund, the bills I covered, the countless favors, I am done being invisible. He sank into a chair, stunned, while Claire entered the room, her composure replaced by disbelief. Margaret, this isn't fair. You can't do this. Yes, I can, I replied. I've realized that true love doesn't mean being taken for granted. It means respecting yourself enough to step away when others won't treat you with dignity. At that moment, Layla, my perceptive granddaughter, peeked from the doorway. Grandma, are you really doing this? Yes, sweetheart, I said softly, smiling. Sometimes the bravest act of love is protecting yourself. Ethan and Claire exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they realized the extent of my contributions, the years of invisible support, and the strength I had silently carried. And now, they were facing a woman who refused to be ignored, a woman reclaiming her life and her power. That day, I learned a vital lesson: boundaries are not about anger, they are about self-respect. And standing up for yourself is the first step toward freedom. After the confrontation with Ethan and Claire, the house felt lighter, though tensions still lingered in the air. I returned to my desk, opening the folder labeled Ethan and Claire, and stared at the meticulous records of decades of giving. Every check, every transfer, every note had been a silent promise I made out of love. Yet, it had become invisible to them, expected and taken for granted. For the first time, I realized I needed to stop being the constant safety net. I poured myself a fresh cup of tea and picked up the phone, calling Riley Thompson again to confirm that all 174 automatic payments had been suspended. Yes, Margaret, Riley replied. Everything is blocked, and your power of attorney has been revoked. A sense of relief washed over me. It was more than just financial control, it was reclaiming my life. I had spent decades enabling my family, and now I was finally free to define my own boundaries. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned, this time accompanied by Claire. Their expressions were a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if they had expected me to bend under the weight of family obligation. Mom, this isn't fair, Ethan said, his voice tight. You can't just cut us off like this. I can, I replied, calm and steady. And I will. Not out of anger, but out of love, for myself. True love doesn't mean being taken for granted. It means respecting yourself enough to step away when others won't treat you with dignity. Claire's face hardened. You're being manipulative. You're trying to punish us. No, I said quietly. I'm simply telling the truth for once. I've spent a lifetime giving, and now it's time to give myself space and peace. Ethan sank into a chair, unable to argue further. It was a moment of realization. They had grown used to my support, my sacrifices, and my quiet compliance. And now, they were facing a woman who would no longer allow herself to be taken for granted. That evening, my granddaughter, Layla, joined me in the kitchen. She looked at me with admiration, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of what I had just done. "Grandma, I'm proud of you," she said softly. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you, sweetheart. Sometimes protecting yourself is the bravest thing you can do." For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of obligation lift. The house was still quiet, but this time, the silence was not oppressive, it was freeing. I had finally set boundaries, taken control of my life, and reminded my family that love does not come at the expense of self-respect. That night, I went to bed with a sense of calm and purpose. The text, the confrontation, and the suspension of payments had not been acts of cruelty, they were acts of courage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly empowered. The days after I took control were quiet but filled with reflection. I had never imagined that reclaiming my power could feel so liberating. For the first time, I was not defined by obligations or expectations, but by my own choices. One afternoon, there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it to see Lila, my perceptive granddaughter, standing with a small bag of groceries and a shy smile. "Grandma," she said softly, "I just wanted to see how you're doing." She didn't come to ask for money, to plead, or to manipulate. She came because she cared. I let her in, and together we unpacked the groceries, laughing quietly as we worked. "Are you really okay?" she asked after a moment, chopping vegetables beside me. I looked at her, really looked at her. "Yes, Lila. For the first time in many years, I think I truly am." She smiled, a mixture of relief and admiration in her eyes. "I've seen how they use you, Grandma. Especially Claire. You always give, and they take, but you never take for yourself." Her words struck me deeply. For years, I had ignored the imbalance, thinking that love meant giving endlessly. But Lila, with her gentle clarity, reminded me that love without boundaries was not love at all, it was self-erasure. We sat down to a simple meal together, just the two of us. No manipulation, no tension, just connection. Lila shared stories from school, her dreams, and her small triumphs, and I shared memories from my own life. It was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. "Grandma, I'll always be here for you," she whispered. "Not for what you give, but for who you are." That hug stayed with me long after she had gone. In a house that had echoed with demands and expectations, her presence was the first genuine connection I had felt in years. It reminded me what family should truly feel like, safe, sincere, and free. The next morning, I felt a new sense of purpose. The confrontation with Ethan and Claire had been necessary, but it was Lila's understanding that reinforced the lesson. Self-respect and boundaries were as much about preserving peace as they were about asserting control. I spent the day organizing my space, not for them, but for myself. Filing papers, arranging books, and sitting quietly on the porch, I realized how long I had neglected my own needs. For the first time, I allowed myself to prioritize my life, my health, and my peace. Lila's visit had been a reminder. There were those who truly saw me, loved me for who I was, and respected my choices. And that realization, more than any confrontation or financial decision, gave me the courage to continue standing firm, knowing that I was finally surrounded by authentic love. 6 months had passed since I had taken control of my life, suspended all payments, and reclaimed my boundaries. The house felt different now, not because it had changed physically, but because I had changed internally. For the first time in decades, I was not anyone's emergency contact, financial plan, or silent sponsor. I was simply Margaret Hayes, free to live on my own terms. Mornings became my sanctuary. I would sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight dance across the garden. I finally allowed myself to read the books I had set aside for years, to take walks in the park where memories of my late husband, Robert, lingered, and to embrace the small joys I had long neglected. Lila visited often. She never asked for money or favors. She simply came to talk, to laugh, and to share her world with me. Her visits reminded me of the family I could trust and the connections that truly mattered. It was a comfort I hadn't felt in years, a reminder that family could be sincere, loving, and reciprocal. As for Ethan and Claire, the calls dwindled. Some were apologetic, others demanding, but I stayed firm. I heard from Lila that they had sold the townhouse and moved into a smaller apartment. Claire had taken on extra work, and Ethan was finally learning to manage his finances responsibly. Even Toby, my youngest grandchild, had started the part-time job with Riley Thompson, learning the value of hard work and responsibility. One day, Lila looked at me with her bright eyes and said, "Grandma, you've changed everything. You've shown me what strength really means." I smiled, feeling a warmth that was not tied to obligation or guilt, but to love, respect, and authenticity. And then came the trip I had always dreamed of but never prioritized. Lila encouraged me, "Do it for you, Grandma. For once, just for you." So I went to Italy. Now, I sit on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset over rolling vineyards. My oldest friend, Lorraine, laughs beside me as she jots down notes in her travel journal. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I replied, watching the golden horizon. I finally laid down the weight of other people's expectations. In that quiet, sun-drenched moment, I understood the truth I had been searching for my whole life. Freedom doesn't come from letting go of people, it comes from letting go of permission. I owe no one an explanation for choosing peace. I owe no one my savings, my time, or my presence at a table where I was never truly welcome. That evening, my phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit up the screen. 6 months ago, I would have answered immediately, rehearsing ways to fix whatever was wrong. But now, I let it fade. I didn't need another promise or another cycle of dependence. I raised my wine glass to the horizon and whispered to myself, "The woman who stayed silent, who gave endlessly, who lived for others, she is gone." In her place stood a woman who understood the strength of boundaries, the courage of independence, and the freedom that comes from valuing oneself above all else. Peace wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the presence of self. And finally, I had it.